Good morning. This week, toward the end of the week, we're starting to learn in the Rambam on the 3-parak cycle. I'll reference the source sheet when we need it. We're going to be starting to learn the laws of Kiddush HaChodesh, of the Jewish calendar. Now, one thing that I've always found fascinating, and I may have even discussed it a number of times in this class, there's so many differences amongst Jewish communities and the Jewish people, the Ashkenazim, the Sfardim, the Teimanim, the Hasidish, the non-Hasidish, etc., etc. But there's and differences which have not just about a custom, but even about things which are relevant to laws, the Raisa, what time does Shabbos come in, what time does Shabbos goes out, major things like that. But isn't it fascinating and so important that when it comes to the Jewish calendar, there's no different of customs. There's nobody saying, my minhag is to do Pesach the day before, the day after, right? Everybody's doing Pesach on the same day within the Jewish people. There are offshoots of the Jewish people, the Samaritan community in Israel, and others who have some sort of Pesach that they do, and I don't know the details, but they do have a different calendar than us, and they did their Pesach thing a couple of weeks after us. This year, again, I don't follow it closely, but it always fascinated me that in the area of the Jewish calendar, there's no difference of minhag, and the laws of the Jewish calendar are so complex that there's certainly room for divergence, but in fact, that was not always the case. About 1100 years ago, there was a major machlokas, and the Jewish people were split into two. And basically, more or less, the split was down the Jewish community in Eretz Yisrael and the Jewish community in Bavel, in Babylonia, which was the main, the headquarters of the biggest Jewish community outside of Israel at the time. And where they were doing for about 2 years, they were doing the calendar 2 days apart. That means that the people out in the community in Bavel, their calendar was, they were doing Pesach 2 days. 1 second, they pushed off Rosh Hashanah. Yes, they did Pesach 2 days later than they did it in Eretz Yisrael. That was going on for a couple of years. And then today, this machlokas has, of course, died down. So in order to understand what this is all about, we're going to go back to understanding the basics of how the Jewish calendar works, what was going on, and why has it died down, and why did the machlokas get settled the way that it did. So, once upon a time, in the time when there was a functioning court as a headquarters of the legal system of the Torah, functioning in Eretz Yisrael, the way Rosh Chodesh, the way the calendar was organized, the way it ran, was based on witnesses citing the new moon. Just very briefly, what does it mean, the new moon? So the moon has a monthly cycle, and at one point during the month, at the moment of the end of the month, the moon is exactly in between. The sun is exactly in between the earth and the moon, and so the moon is invisible from the earth. There is no moon. And then a moment later, that is what we call in Hebrew the Meilad, the birth of the new moon. A moment later is when the moon is a tiny drop moved away from the sun, and so at least in theory there would be a tiny crescent of a moon that you could see. That moment is the moment of the Meilad, and when witnesses came and they said that we have seen the new moon, then the Beis Din would say, okay, if you saw the new moon today, that means today is Rosh Chodesh. If the new moon wasn't seen or wasn't testified, so then it would not be Rosh Chodesh, and then by default Rosh Chodesh would be the next day. Now, of course, you don't actually see the moon the moment after the Meilad. First of all, the moment after the Meilad, the moon is only removed sort of from the sun, blocking it a tiny hair's breadth. That's not big enough for the human eye to perceive. It needs to be approximately six hours after the Meilad for it to be for the moon to be visible, and even then it's in Eretz Yisrael, and even then it's only in very ideal conditions. Meaning, if the Meilad happens, the Meilad could happen any time of the day or night. So if the Meilad happens at I don't know, let's say at around sunset, right? You're not going to see the moon then because the sun it's still bright. 6 hours later, in theory, the moon would be able to be visible, but it wouldn't be on the horizon anymore. So, again, the definition of the Moiled is the moment after the convergence of the sun, moon, and the earth. Depending on many, many variables, it could be possible sometimes to see the new moon as early as 6 hours after the Moiled. Often it would be quite a few more hours after that. Now, says the Rambam, I'm going to read to you from the Laws of Kiddush HaChedesh, chapter 5, halacha 1. Everything that we have said about the way Rosh Chodesh is done based on the testimony of the witnesses and how they would add a month to the year, etc. This can only be done by the court, the Sanhedrin, in the land of Israel, or by, if it wasn't the high court, but at least a bezdin of Samuchim, of people who have smicha, which is the type of smicha that we don't have nowadays, meaning this is a smicha which is directly one person to another person traced directly to Moshe Rabbeinu. And this bezdin have permission from the Sanhedrin to do so. Right? So in other words, this whole idea that you accept testimony and based on that say when Rosh Chodesh is going to be, or say which year is going to be a leap year, or have an extra month, etc., can only be done by the bezdin hasmuchim, by the Sanhedrin or the bezdin that have the real McCoy smicha in the land of Israel. This is known from the pasuk that Hashem said to Moshe, "HaChodesh is Elochem," that it's this whole mitzvah is given to you, to Moshe and Aaron, who they represent the Sanhedrin. Okay. If there is no Sanhedrin in Eretz Yisrael, so then you don't fix the month based on testimony of sighting of the new moon. Rather, we do it based on the fixed calendar calculation that we use today. Says the Rambam, halacha l'Moshe Sinai. This is a halacha tradition received directly from Moshe Rabbeinu at Sinai. What is that? Namely, what is the halacha? Shebizman sheyesh Sanhedrin. That there's two ways. The halacha God told Moshe Rabbeinu. There's two ways for the Jewish calendar to operate. Option number one is that when there is a Sanhedrin, when there are these rabbis with smicha in Eretz Yisrael, then they fix the calendar based on the citations, on the sighting on the sighting of the new moon. And if in absence of a Sanhedrin like we have today, then it's not done based on the sighting of the new moon. It's done based on a fixed calculation. That is halacha l'Moshe Sinai.
And it's always like 29:30, right?
Yeah, so we'll get to that in a moment. But there's a fixed cheshbon, there's a fixed calculation, arithmetic, whatever it's called, of exactly what the calendar is, and it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai, says the Rambam, that we should follow, in the absence of the Sanhedrin, we follow this fixed way of doing it. Now, the difference between one of the differences between the fixed calendar and the calendar based on testimony is when is the Moiled. When it was done by when the calendar was fixed based on the witnesses citing the new moon, so then Rosh Chodesh always had to be after the Moiled, because first the Moiled happens, then however many hours later witnesses see the new moon, they come to Bezdin and testify, and then they could make Rosh Chodesh. Whereas once you have like the calendar that we have today, sometimes the Moiled can be on Rosh Chodesh, and sometimes it can be before. And the Rambam adds that sometimes, in a very rare occasion, the Moiled can be even after Rosh Chodesh. And this is very rare. It only happens in the lands which are west of Eretz Yisrael. What that means is that if the Moiled occurs, one second. Sorry, we're the east. I'm getting confused. Right, we'll get west of Eretz Yisrael. No, we are west. So 1 second. What does that mean? That means that Yeah, the Rambam is just saying that the Rambam is saying that in the west of Eretz Yisrael, it's more likely that Rosh Chodesh can be after the Moiled, which is sometimes which is it's true, because the further west you get from Eretz Yisrael, the further in other words in Eretz Yisrael, the Moiled is usually going to be much closer to Rosh Chodesh than it is as you go further to the west. The Moiled Rosh Chodesh starts a few hours later. Okay, fine. Okay, again, bottom line, there are two ways to let's summarize everything we've said until now. There are two ways to have the Jewish calendar. One is based on sighting of the new moon. One is based on the calculation. There's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. The Moshe Rabbeinu teaches us that that when there's a Sanhedrin, when there are rabbis with Semicha and Eretz Yisrael, we follow the first option. When in absence of that, we follow the second option, the fixed calendar. Okay, now I should point out that the idea of that you make Rosh Chodesh based on a calculation and not on an actual sighting of the moon, even though now that's what we do every single month, even in the time where there was a functioning Sanhedrin, it happened sometimes. In other words, sometimes the witnesses didn't come on time, because it's also possible that even if the moon is theoretically visible, in practice it won't be visible because it's too cloudy. So in theory, you could have too many months becoming extended to a 30-day month instead of a 29-day month because witnesses didn't come because it was too cloudy, and then you're going to end up with a skewed calendar. So it did happen sometimes. It wasn't so common, but it did happen sometimes that even in the time of the Sanhedrin, where they were waiting for witnesses, if witnesses didn't come, they would still make it Rosh Chodesh even in absence of witnesses. So that did happen once upon a time, sometimes, and now that is what we do every single month. Okay, now, what is exactly the calculation that we have for the calendar? Where does it come from? So that everybody knows, and this you even have in the first paragraph in your source sheet, that Hillel HaNasi was an Amora of the 5th generation in the land of Israel. He held the office of Nasi of the Sanhedrin between 320 and 385 of the Common Era. He is traditionally regarded as the creator. This is copy and paste from Wikipedia, by the way. He is traditionally regarded as the creator of the modern fixed Jewish calendar. The tradition first appears in the response of Rav Haigain, cited by Rabbi and Chia and Sefer HaIbu, which is a very important sefer. The first sefer which talks about these things at great length. It was written, it says, in 1123, although it wasn't published till a while later. The citation explicitly refers to that year, to the year that this event happened, which corresponds to about 358, 359 of the Common Era. So basically, that's during the period where Hillel HaNasi has the office of the Nasi of the Sanhedrin. He is fixing the Jewish calendar. Now, even though that's true that Hillel HaNasi fixed the Jewish calendar, as we'll see soon, there are certain details of the Jewish calendar that weren't 100% fixed and were accepted all over the world until some time later. Now, so let's go over just the very basics of the Jewish calendar, the way we have it today, the fixed calendar. So everybody knows there's 12 months in the year. Once in a while there's a leap year, which is 13 months, and the months basically are always 29 or 30 days, and that's it. So that's how you have the length of the year. However, there are 2 months that we could play with. There are 2 months that sometimes have 29 days. In other words, Tishrei always has 30 days. Teves, Shvat, Adar, Nisan, Adar Rishon, Adar Sheni, Nisan, Iyar, all of the months, they're always the same. Sivan is always going to be 30 days. Iyar is always going to be 29 days in the fixed calendar. Once upon a time it wasn't like that. But nowadays, those are always fixed. There's 2 months that you could play around with. Those are Cheshvan and Kislev, which Cheshvan can sometimes be 29 days or 30 days, and so too Kislev can sometimes be 29 and 30 days. And what that gives you is that any given year, meaning whether it's a regular year or a leap year, can have 3 possible amount of days. Meaning, if you have a regular year, not a leap year, so if Cheshvan and Kislev are both 30 days long, then that year is going to have 355 days. If they're both 29 days long, it's going to be, and this you can look on the chart on your page, then the year is going to be 353 days. And if if Cheshvan and Kislev alternate between 29 and 30 days, then that year is going to be 354 days. Same is true for a leap year, that you have a 3-day spectrum, which a leap year can be a minimum of 383 days, a maximum of 385 days, and it can also be 384 days. But there's only the 2 months, Cheshvan and Kislev, that you could play with. So it's impossible for a year to be less than 353 days of a common year or less than 383 days of a leap year. And similarly, it's impossible for a common year to be more than 355 days or for a leap year to be more than 385 days. And you see all those numbers on the chart on your page. Yeah. Now,
why does it say deficient? What is it?
Deficient means when Cheshvan and Kislev are both 29 days. Full or perfect means when Cheshvan and Kislev are both 30 days. And yes.
Maybe I missed it. Why did you say Cheshvan and Kislev are the 2 months?
Why Cheshvan and Kislev? I'll get back to that in a moment. But first, let me explain so how do we determine, what are the determining factors as to when Cheshvan and Kislev are going to be 29 or 30 days, what they're going to be. So we have here a principle called dechiyos. There are 4 principles of dechiyos, which means we're going to push off Rosh Hashanah. In other words, the way the calendar works is you calculate when is the next Moilad going to be, when is the next going to, right? So whatever the Moilad is today, whatever the Moilad of the month of Tishrei is, that day is going to be Rosh Hashanah. You make 12 cycles of Moilad, that means 12 times 29 and a half, and in other words, the cycle of the Moilad is 29 days, 12 hours, and 793 chalakim, which is about 42 minutes. So basically, you do that, the math, 29 days, 12 hours, 793 chalakim times 12, that's going to bring you to the Moilad of the following Tishrei, and that day is going to be Rosh Hashanah. Except there are 4 dechiyos, that means, dechiyos means to push off, to postpone. So there are 4 scenarios in which whatever day the Moilad of the next Rosh Hashanah is going to fall, we're going to push off Rosh Hashanah either 1 day or 2 days. And we're going to see briefly what those 4 dechiyos are. And based on that, we're going to determine the length of Cheshvan and Kislev on that month. In other words, if I know, let's say what Rosh Hashanah of this year is, I'm trying to figure out when Rosh Hashanah of next year is. So I do the calculation, 12 times 29, 12, 793. If the Moilad, if it turns out that Rosh Hashanah should be on that day, that none of those 4 reasons to postpone Rosh Hashanah apply, then Cheshvan and Kislev are both going to be 29 days. If my calculation is going to determine that I have to push off Rosh Hashanah 1 day, then I'm going to make Kislev 30 days, right? And if my calculation is going to determine that I have to put off Rosh Hashanah 2 days, so then I'm going to make Cheshvan and Kislev be 30 days. So when I make
2 extra days, you do that in the next year? What?
No, so that's what I'm saying. When Cheshvan and sorry?
You said there's 4 push-offs.
No, there's 4 reasons to push off, but you're always going to push off only 1 day or 2 days. You never push it off 1 or 2 days. So there could be 4 possible reasons to push off Rosh Hashanah. But you're always going to, if your calculation is going to determine that you have to push off Rosh Hashanah, whether 1 day or 2 days, you're always going to factor that postponement 10, 11 months earlier by Cheshvan and Kislev. Right?
You're always going to do that.
10 or 11 months earlier. So if next Rosh Hashanah has to be pushed off 1 day, I'm going to add a day to the previous Kislev 10 months earlier. If next Rosh Hashanah has to be pushed off 2 days, I'm going to add a day to Cheshvan 11 months earlier. Why Cheshvan and Kislev? So basically, the reason why Cheshvan and Kislev, very briefly, it's not really relevant to understand the whole thing. Why we chose Cheshvan and Kislev is because we start from the beginning. Well, there's 2 ways to put it. One is you could say you start from the beginning of the year, which is Tishrei, and you don't want to, because Tishrei is a holy month, and there's all the Yomim Tovim, so you want Tishrei to have sort of its standard form, and then, right away after that, Cheshvan and Kislev are the first 2 months, which we could play around with. There are other Mefarshim who say actually we start the year from Nisan, but we don't. But we can't do Nisan, Iyar, and Iyar because we want Shavuos to always be on the same date. We can't do Sivan Tammuz of Elul Tishrei because we want there to be 120 days from Shavuos till Yom Kippur, corresponding to the 3 times 40 days that Moshe Rabbeinu went to Har Sinai from Shavuos, and that Yom Kippur was that Yom Kippur. We just read yesterday in the Parsha that Yom Kippur is that was about the Meraglim, but it's the pasuk. Yeah, Parshas Kisisa. That we want that Yom Kippur. The reason why Yom Kippur was established as a day for atonement is because in the year of the giving of the Torah, Hashem atoned for the golden calf 120 days after the giving of the Torah, so we don't want to mess with any of those months, and then we don't want to mess with Tishrei, and so the first possible months to do it are Cheshvan and Kislev. So whichever way you to go,
If
it's
that's the
based.
case, why do they start with Kislev? Cheshvan comes first.
Heshvan's first, right?
You're saying why if there's only one day to push off, why do we push off? Probably because you want the months to alternate. So Tishrei is 30 days, and then Kislev. So we prefer that it be Tishrei 30 days, Cheshvan 29 days, and Kislev 30 days, rather than having two.
No, but you said they start with Kislev.
Yes, the reason to start with Kislev is because if you're only adding one day, it makes more sense to add it to Kislev than to
You're
Cheshvan.
adding it there. All right, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So everybody with me so far? Yes. Okay. What are the 4 reasons to push off Rosh Hashanah 1 day, 2 days, etc.? Now, we're going to talk about when does the Moiled come out to. Now, whenever you say in Torah and Halacha, the day starts the night before. So if I tell you that the Moiled, so for simplicity, we talk about a day starting at 6 p.m. and finishing 6 p.m. the next day. So if I tell you that the Moiled occurs on Sunday at 18 hours, that means in today's clock we call that 12 noon, right? Because if the day started on Saturday at 6 p.m., so 18 hours into the day of Sunday means Sunday at noon, right? Mm-hmm. If I tell you that the Moiled of Monday falls at 9 hours, what that means is about 3 o'clock in the morning, right? Yes? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Starting from...
we start when we say the Moiled of any given day of the week, we start at whatever many hours you say, you're starting that count from 6 p.m. the previous evening.
Shkia or
6
Tzeit?
p.m. No, 6 p.m.
Just
Yeah, because we're not talking here about sunset, and it's not about dark and light, it's a 24-hour cycle.
that's when the day starts, no? And then from there.
No, it's not from when the day starts. It's from the mean sunset, I guess.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. That sounds fine.
Okay. So, sorry?
That's a surprise. That's cool.
Okay. So the first Dechia is perhaps the most famous one, which is Lo Adu Rosh. That Rosh Hashanah cannot fall on Sunday, Wednesday, or Friday. Right? That's the famous joke. What's the first thing when Hill sat down to convene the meeting for the calendar? What is the first thing that he said? Without any further ado. Right? So Lo Adu Rosh. Adu means it's Aleph Dalet Vav, which is 1, 4, 6. No,
That for sure happens.
Rosh Hashanah cannot fall on Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday. So what that means is,
Why not?
why not? So we'll get to why not soon. Let's first see what, and then we'll see why not. What that means is that if the Moiled for Tishrei is going to fall on Monday, then Monday is Rosh Hashanah. If it's going to fall on Tuesday, then Tuesday is Rosh Hashanah. If the Moiled falls on Wednesday, you can't make Wednesday Rosh Hashanah. You're going to have to push off Rosh Hashanah to Thursday, and that means you're going to add a day back in Kislev. You're going to add a day, right?
To make sure it falls out on...
Friday.
On not on Wednesday, you're going to push it off to Thursday. If your Moiled falls on Thursday, you're going to make it on Thursday. If your Moiled falls on Friday, you're going to push it off to Shabbos, right? So the bottom line is that's the first Dechia. The first Dechia, the first reason to postpone Rosh Hashanah is if the Moiled of Tishrei falls on Sunday, Wednesday, Friday, you push off Rosh Hashanah till the next day. Okay? Number two is, and by the way, the way I'm presenting this is the way the Rambam presents this in the 7th chapter of Kiddush HaChodesh.
To make sure, say, you don't want Rosh Hashanah to fall out on a Sunday,
A Wednesday or a Friday.
Okay. So if you have the Moled on Thursday, then in theory it would be.
If the
it would
Moiled
be
is on
Friday.
Thursday, then Rosh Hashanah is Thursday.
That,
If the Moiled Thursday, then Rosh Hashanah is Thursday. Yeah? If the Moiled is Friday, then Rosh Hashanah is going to be Shabbos. Now, halacha base. If the Moiled falls on noon or afternoon, in other words, in Moiled time, this means after 18 hours, then you push it off to the next day. So, if the Moiled falls on Tuesday, you make Rosh Hashanah on Tuesday.
That's only if it's before
Only if it's on Tuesday in the
Before
first
6.
18 hours of Tuesday, meaning from 6 p.m. on Monday night until noon. If the moiled is at noon or afternoon on Tuesday, meaning that those 6 hours between noon and 6 p.m. on Tuesday, then you push it off to the next day. That's only if the next day is a day that you're allowed to make Rosh Hashanah. If the next day is a Wednesday, then you have to push it off all the way to Thursday. So that's how you have a 2-day postponement. Because if the moiled falls in the last 6 hours of the day, from noon until 6 p.m. of any given day, you have to push off Rosh Hashanah to the following day. If the following day is a Sunday, Wednesday, Friday, then you have to push it off again another day. So that's how you're going to have to add 2 days to the previous Cheshvan and Kislev, because you're going to have to push off Rosh Hashanah 2 days.
Also, the only time that you could make it the day that the moled appears, you can make Rosh Hashanah the day the moled appears, is if it happens before noon.
If it happens before noon, that means the first 18 hours of the day, from 6 p.m. the previous night until noon, on a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, or Shabbos.
All right.
Tuesday, Thursday,
Those are all the days of the week besides Sunday, Wednesday, Friday.
No.
Okay. Now,
Which are 7 days.
yes. Now, by the way, this idea that if the moiled falls after noon, we push it off to the next day, that in halachic vernacular, that's referred to as moiled zaken, which literally means an old moiled, meaning a moiled that comes late in the day, so you push it off to the next day. And one of the reasons, the Rambam doesn't explain this, but one of the reasons for the moiled zaken is that if you make sure to always push off Rosh Hashanah moiled zaken, then you're going to make sure that you'll never have a moiled on the second day of the month. In other words, the moiled is always, in our calendar, the moiled is always going to be either the day before Rosh Chodesh or on Rosh Chodesh. Sometimes, rarely, sometimes it can be on the second day of Rosh Chodesh. Meaning, if there's a month with 2 days of Rosh Chodesh, it can sometimes be on the second day of Rosh Chodesh. But the moiled can never be on the second day of the month. And that's one of the things that the moiled is, this rule of moiled, pushing off the moiled zaken is supposed to take care of. Yes, Yosef.
I'm just trying to figure out how that's the case.
Oh, you're not going to figure that. It's built on so many other calculations. These are like.
All right, I'll stop working on it.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, you could work on it. It's not the thing, but you're not based on the information we have here today. Okay. Now, so those again. So far, we've said there's 4 total dechiyos. We've so far spoken about 2 of the 4. The first dechiya we've spoken about is that if the moiled falls on Sunday, Wednesday, Friday, we push it off to the next day. The second dechiya we've spoken about is if the moiled falls on any of the other days of the week after Chatzos, not either at Chatzos or after. So then
Goes to the next
then you
day.
push it off to the next day, and if the next day is a Sunday, Wednesday, Friday, it goes even to the next day. By the way, what's this idea of at Chatzos or after? So this is very famous and parenthetic, just getting off topic for a moment. We mentioned before that the soonest after the moiled that it's ever possible in the most optimum conditions to see the moon is within the first 6 hours. After the moiled. In other words, is 6 hours after the moiled. You can never see the moon. The moon will never be visible within 6 hours after the moiled. So this is connected to the opinion of Rabbi, of the Meir, who based on this Gemara deduced that the location of the halachic date line is 90 degrees, which is 6 hours east of Jerusalem. Because, again, I don't know exactly the details. I just thought it's relevant to mention that this Gemara, that 6 hours after the moiled you cannot see the moon, is connected to the opinion of a Paigoin that he places the halachic date line 6 hours, which means 90 degrees east of Jerusalem. That's completely parenthetic, not relevant to the discussion today. So we could move on. Just if we have
It's also the sheet of Chazon Ish, right?
No. Chazon Ish is much further.
Not 90 degrees for him?
I don't think so. I think it's much further.
Yeah?
It's by Australia. Australia is more than 90 degrees east of Jerusalem.
Okay. That's the sheet of Hagon.
Yeah. No, not Rav Hagon, the Balamor. I said Rav Hagon, I meant the Balamor. Anyway, moving on. If we ever get back to talking about the date line, so we'll come back to this Gemara. Okay. Now, the other 2 dechiyos seem to be quite arbitrary. And that is that... Okay, number 3 goes like this. If the moiled of Tishrei falls on Tuesday night at 9 hours 204 halakim, or later than that, and that year is a Shana Pshuta, not a leap year, a regular year, then you push off you push off Rosh Hashanah. So in other words, like this. If the Moiled falls on Monday, you make Rosh Hashanah Monday. If it falls on Monday afternoon, you push it off to Tuesday. Fine. If it falls on Tuesday, and the year is not a leap year, it's a regular year, so then the cutoff is not noon. The cutoff is 9 hours and 204 chalakim. That means about 3 a.m. and change. Right? So if the Moiled falls on Tuesday, at or after 9 hours and 204 chalakim, so somewhere, I didn't make the math, but somewhere around 3 a.m., then you push off Rosh Hashanah, and when are you going to push Rosh Hashanah off till? You can't push off to Wednesday, because Wednesday's then, you're going to push off to Thursday, right? That's Dechiyah number 3. And if you want to read what is the sense of this Dechiyah, so let's look at this is on your source sheet as well, we can read this paragraph together. This rule eliminates all of the 356-day years that would otherwise be caused by the disallowed weekday rule. In other words, the longest you could have a non-leap year, like we said, is 355 days. If you wouldn't have this Dechiyah in place, you would sometimes come out with a year that would be 356 days. Why? Because for the fixed arithmetic traditional Hebrew calendar, if the Moiled of Tishrei of a non-leap year falls on Tuesday at or after 9 hours and 204 chalakim, which like we said is about 3 a.m., then the next Moiled of Tishrei, 12 cycles of Moiled later, 12 Moiled intervals later, will place it at or after noon on Shabbos, which will be postponed to Sunday. But that weekday is not allowed. So Rosh Hashanah will then be postponed to Monday. Either of these postponements would cause this year's length to be 356 days. But the longest possible length of a non-leap year is 355 days when Chesh and Kislev are both full. And therefore, in order to make sure that next year is not going to be 356 days, we have to add a day to the previous year and push off Rosh Hashanah, in this case 2 days, so that the next year will be an acceptable 354 days and not an unacceptable 356 days.
We add another day to the year before,
yes.
so that we don't have to...
Exactly. Right?
All this still begs the question. I know you're going to get back to it. Why the?
Okay, yeah, we'll get. Let's first see what, then we'll see what. Now, how common is this type of dechiyah? So it's not so common. It's the longest amount of years you could have without this type of dechiyah is 71 years. The shortest amount of time you could have without this dechiyah is 7 years. On average, it's about once every 30 years, and just for more trivia, the last time it happened was in the year of Tov Shin Mem Tes, which was Rosh Hashanah of 1988, and the next time it's going to happen will be in 5796, which is Rosh Hashanah of 2035. So that's about what is that? About a 44-year difference, right? So whereas the first and the second Dechiyah are very common, this Dechiyah is quite rare. And now we'll see in a moment that the fourth type of Dechiyah is even more rare than that. They can be as many as 345 years with not using that Dechiyah. The average is once every 186 years. The last time it happened was in 2005, and the next time it's going to happen will be in 2253. That means 230 years apart from 2005. What is that fourth Dechiyah? The fourth Dechiyah is that if the Moiled of Tishrei in the year following a leap year falls on Monday at 3 hours and 589 chalakim, so that means 3 hours into the day, so that means it's really 15 hours, because it's 12 hours a night and 53 hours into the day, so that means we're now talking 9 o'clock in the morning. If the Moiled happens on 9 o'clock in the morning and 589 halakim, so then, and this is a regular year coming following a leap year, so then you push off Rosh Hashanah till the next day, till Tuesday. You don't make Rosh Hashanah on Monday, you make Rosh Hashanah on Tuesday. Again, this is something that happens on average once every 186 years. And what is the reason for this one? So, again, similarly, for some reason, this is also on your source sheet. If you turn to the next page, to the other side, the logic of it is the same as the previous one. This rule eliminates all 382-day years that would otherwise be caused by the disallowed weekday postponement rule. In other words, the shortest a leap year is allowed to be is 383 years, and if you wouldn't have this rule in place, that could sometimes be a year that would be 382 days. For the fixed arithmetic traditional Hebrew calendar, if the Moed of Tishrei falls on Monday at or after 15 hours, 589 halakim, and the previous year was a leap year, then the previous Moed of Tishrei would have been 13 Moed intervals earlier, which would have placed it at or after noon on Tuesday, which would have postponed it to Wednesday, but that's a week that's not allowed, so that would have postponed it to Thursday, which would result in a 382-day year. That's not allowed, and so we have to adjust for that, adding a day to the previous year, pushing off the following Rosh Hashanah, adding a day to Kislev, to make it a 383-day year. Okay, so that's basically what we have. There's 4 dechiyos. The second 2 dechiyos is like if the moed falls on a certain time, you push it off, okay? The first 2 are very simple. If it's after Chatzos, you push it off to the next day, and then it can never be on Sunday, Wednesday, Friday. So if it does, you push it off another day over there. Now, everybody's asking what's the reason for all these sort of random numbers. I'll just say briefly, and why specifically Sunday, Wednesday, Friday. So, why Sunday, Wednesday, Friday is a very interesting topic. If we have time at the end of the class, I'll get back to that. But I'll just say for now, is that the way the Rambam presents it, at least, is that this number that we're using for the Moilad, that the Moilad interval is 29 days, 12 hours, 793 halakim from one Moilad to the other, is an average number. It's not accurate. Really, the Moilad can sometimes be less than that, and sometimes be more than that. Which is why, for example, and the Moilad that we announce in Shul and Shabbos V'Archim uses this average number. Now, how do you know that that's not the accurate Moilad? Sometimes it becomes very apparent, because a lunar eclipse can only happen at the moment of the Moilad. And sometimes you'll see that there's a lunar eclipse a few hours before or after the Moilad that we announce. Similarly, a solar eclipse can only happen at exactly the halfway point between one Moilad and the next, because that's when the moon, earth, sun are going to be aligned in a way that the moon, it's going to be earth, moon, sun, that the moon is going to be blocking the sun from the earth. So that could only happen at exactly halfway point from Moilad to Moilad. And you'll see that, for example, we had a few years ago a big full solar eclipse here in Illinois. It was visible in the south of Illinois, and it wasn't at exactly I'm sorry, it's the other way around. The lunar eclipse can only happen in the middle of the month, the solar eclipse can only happen at the moment of the Moilad, the other way around, right? So the solar eclipse doesn't happen at the time of the Moilad. It happens, is that true? The solar eclipse is the moon in between. Solar eclipse means that you have the moon blocking between the earth and the sun. No, so that should happen in the middle of the month. It happens in the middle of the month. And the lunar eclipse is where the earth is between.
Solar eclipse has the moon blocking the sun.
That's solar. And then
That would have to be the
Lunar.
That's the 15th of the month, right? And the lunar eclipse is where the earth is blocking the moon, and the sun is on the other side. That would be at the beginning of the month. But you see, if you Google, you'll see when the times of the eclipses are, you'll see they don't match exactly, and that's because our Moilad times is average. Sometimes it's less than 29 and a half and 793, sometimes it's more, and so we average it out. Now, the way the Rambam presents it is basically that this number that we're using, in order to make it, in other words, it's not 100% the average, so in order to adjust for any inconsistencies that will happen from using this number, we need to implement these 4 techiyos, these 4 principles of postponing the Moilad. And so, and basically, trust me, he says that if you put in these 4 principles into place, the calendar will stay on track, and you'll never have strange things happening. And for example, he says, how do you see it? He says, for example, sometimes the Moilad will come out on Monday night, which is Tuesday, and you're going to push off Rosh Hashanah till Thursday, because like we said before, that if the Moilad falls on Tuesday night after 9 hours, whatever, right, you push it off to Thursday. And yet, it's still possible that the moon won't be visible until Thursday or even Friday, on Thursday night, Wednesday night to Thursday night. So you see that even though you've pushed off Rosh Hashanah 2 days, you're still coming to the Moilad. And the point is, right, because the reason we pushed it off is that we're taking into account that these postponements are going to align up with the Moilad accurately. Why is this so disturbing to you, Yosef?
firstly, it's like not a total answer on the first question.
What's the first
It's
question?
basically saying, take it on faith, it's gonna work this way, which, fine, I do have faith in the Rambam, no question. But I would still like to understand it. On the being done on the first.
Why do we choose Sunday, Wednesday, Friday?
Yeah, I would like that, but the other thing is, I think a better question is, they did it on averages back when they didn't have calculators. It made sense, but now we have calculators, and we have a lot of Rabbanim. So why wouldn't we just go back to doing it the right way instead of playing these games?
Because our bonds don't understand Kiddush HaChedesh for some.
Because the reason is because there's there could be other reasons why. In other words, they didn't have calculators, but they had a very thorough mathematical understanding of the astronomy. And you see that from the Rambam. I mean, the Rambam had a better idea of astronomy than the astronomers in his time. You can see that from some of his calculations. That now, with computers, we know how accurate they are. But in those days, he was not saying the same thing as astronomers of his time. And also, the whole idea of the calendar comes. So there could be, in other words, there could be other reasons why we're not making it an exact average. Right? There's other things that we want to have in place.
And forget average,
One
it could be
moment.
exact. It
One
doesn't
moment.
need to be average.
We don't want it. We don't want it to make. We can't be exact because you don't make. Because the Moila doesn't happen at the beginning of the day, right? So that's why you have a month of 29 and 30 days. You don't have a month of 29 and a half days, right? But the point is also that all of these things of the calendar come by Kabbalah from Hillel Hanassi, and perhaps it seems that even certain elements of it even come from Moshe Rabbeinu B'Halacha L'Moshe Messina, and that seems to be implicit in the Rambam. So we don't mess with this because, right, this is the tradition. This is what we do. Okay, why Sunday, Wednesday, Friday? Again, I don't want to give too much time to that right now. I'll just say briefly that the Chayra, according to the Rambam, it's technical. In other words, in order for the system to work, you need to have alternating days where Rosh Hashanah can't fall. So Rosh Hashanah can fall on Tuesday, it can't fall on Wednesday, it can fall on Thursday, it can't fall on Friday, it can fall on Shabbos, it can fall on Sunday, it can fall on Monday, right? It's just about having, in order for the system to work, you need to have alternating days. That would seem, that's the way the Rambam presents it. Why we chose, according to the Rambam at least, it seems at the core of it, it's a technical thing. You just need to choose. You could have just as well chosen that Rosh Hashanah shouldn't fall on Monday, Thursday, and Shabbos. But for whatever reason, we chose Sunday, Wednesday, Friday. Like I said, if we have time at the end, I'll get back and say a little bit more about that.
I guess any time that you could ask the question equally in both directions, so then it's not really a question anymore. Meaning,
Yeah. Okay. Fine.
if I would have said this, you would have asked that. If I would have done this, then you would have asked that. So then, there's really, we had to choose one thing, so we chose something. That's good enough of an answer.
Yeah, but there's more to it. The Ravid says "V'achata adu," and it becomes a whole discussion. There's other reasons al pi halacha. There's other reasons al pi Kabbalah. Okay. So now let's get back to where we started from today, the major controversy that happened about 1100 years ago. So here I put the first paragraph of this on the source sheet. In the year 920 of the Common Era, which is 4681 of the Hebrew years, Aaron ben Meir. So Ben Meir was the leader of the Jewish people in Israel, and he proposed that the rule of the Chiyas Meilad Zakim be relaxed by 642 parts, 642 chalakim. Now, an hour of 60 minutes is divided into 1,080 chalakim, and so 642 parts means approximately 35 minutes. So instead of limiting the time of postponements to 18 hours, Ben Meir suggested that it be increased to 18 hours and 642 chalakim. Right? So basically, the last three dechiyos that we've said, that if the moiled falls at noon, you push it off to the next day. If it falls on Tuesday after 9 hours and 204 chalakim, you push it off to the next, you push it off. If it falls on a regular year, and if it falls on Monday at this time after a leap year, you push off. All of these three push-offs, which have a certain time, the Ben Meir said we have to push this off 642 chalakim. So it's not noon, it's 642 chalakim afternoon. It's not Tuesday 9 hours, that means Monday night 9 hours and 204 chalakim. It's 846 chalakim.
What does that come out in actual time? If it's noon, so then what?
It's 35 minutes, right?
35 minutes.
Approximately, not exactly, but it's approximately 35 minutes, right?
So whenever the moed.
So whenever the moiled falls in that 35-minute window, right, we have machloikas One second. Whenever the Meir falls in that 35-minute window, we have a machlokes about do we have to push off Rosh Hashanah or not. Now, although that sounds, the truth is that, so this became a major controversy, which the irony of it is that now we know how major of a controversy this was, but previously, in other words, till a few decades ago, Benzi, this was completely unknown. It's fine.
Making noise?
No, it's just a sharp knife. It was getting me scared.
Oh, okay.
And this whole controversy was basically found out from research of documents discovered in the Cairo Geniza. I don't remember offhand what year the Cairo Geniza was discovered, but yeah, fairly recently. So it's interesting that it was such a major controversy, and at the same time it was completely forgotten. And actually, in a Sikha, the Rabbi mentioned this, and the Rabbi said that we see here the value of lois eskodelu, in other words, the value of avoiding machlokes. That even though Ben Meir said that he didn't make this up himself, he said, "No, this is my tradition, and I know this is the correct way to do it." Nevertheless, it became so forgotten about that not only do all the Jewish people accept the other opinion, but it was unknown. Nobody even knew about this whole controversy. Now, basically, this controversy. One second. One thing that I'm not 100% sure about right now, even though I thought I had this clear, but one thing I'm not 100% sure about is whether the opinion of Ben Meir applied even to the Chiyah number 2 or only to the Chiyahs 3 and 4. I'm not 100% sure about that. Meaning, did it apply even the regular Dechiyah that you say if the Moiled falls afternoon, you push it off to the next day? Did he relax that by 642 Chalakim also, or only the third and the fourth Dechiyah, which, like we said, are not so common? So that's one detail which I don't have clear in my head right now. But be that as it may, what that means in practice is that there are certain years where, according to the Babylonian calculation, which is the way I've presented it based on what the Rambam says, Rosh Hashanah would have to be pushed off, and according to Ben Meir, Rosh Hashanah would not have to be pushed off. So that means in the previous Cheshvan and Kislev, Bavel are going to add a day or two, and Ben Meir is not going to add a day or two. And then you have the two calendars being off for a year or possibly 2 years sometimes, until a year or two later, where it's going to have caught up with itself, and now Ben Meir is going to have to, the Israeli calculation are going to have to add 2 days, and Bavel are not going to have to add 2 days because they already added the 2 days 2 years earlier, and then they're going to come up again. So I've put here on your source sheets a chart where I haven't done the whole chart, I just showed a few years. First of all, the first year that this became irrelevant, that in practice there were Jewish people, the Israeli community and the Bavel community, keeping the calendar apart, was in the years of 1922 and 1923 of the Common Era. The next time it happened was 5 years later in the year 927 of the Common Era. The next time it happened after that wasn't till more than 100 years later, in the year 1108 of the Common Era. That's the next time this became relevant. Right? Now, I've skipped some of the years in between, just talking today in 2023, the next time where Ben Meir's calendar would be different than our calendar is in 2 years' time in the year 2025. The next time after that would be in the 2 years of 2028 and 2029, and the next time after that wouldn't be till another very long time later, to the year 2247. Right? That's just the summary of the years where it's relevant. And here you see that in all these years, I've put here the dates that, according to the regular dates of Rosh Hashanah, for example, according to our regular calculation, in 2025, Rosh Hashanah is going to be on September 23rd. But according to Ben Meir's calendar, he's going to take off one day that we have added to Cheshvan of the previous year, and he's going to make Rosh Hashanah of 2025 fall on September 22nd. Right? So you could see that in your chart, and you have all the dates over there. Now, so it was once assumed that there was an article about this written by Lawrence Schiffman, recently published in the Army magazine, and there's a professor, Sasha something or other from London, who's written a whole book about this. originally it was assumed that Reb Sadi Gaon was actually the main, the opposing shitta of the Bavel was Reb Sadi Gaon. It seems now they're saying that actually Reb Sadi Gaon was involved and he was totally on the Bavel side of this machlokes, but that he wasn't the main player over here. Now, this became a major controversy, and it was really a very fierce battle in those years of 922, 923, and even before 920 and 921. Later, 927, it's not clear what happened, but the next time this was relevant, by the year 1108, which was, like I said, more than 150 years later, there's no record anymore of this machlokes being existent. It's unclear exactly why. It could be that by that time the authority and the stamina of the Israeli Jewish community had dwindled, and so Bavel just naturally took the lead. So it's unclear exactly what made this machlokes sort of settle, what made the dust settle, and maybe it was just time and circumstances that changed. But again, after that, this machlokes was completely unheard of, and Bavel had the absolutely upper hand, and today there isn't a community in the world who follows the opinion of Ben Meir. Now just wait, in 2025 there's going to be some machlokes, and it's going to say, we'll find some chumrah.com who's going to, whatever. Okay, and then there'll be people doing 4 days of Pesach, 3 days in that year. But anyway, now it's interesting that in the whole machlokes over here, a big part of the controversy was not about who's right, in other words, whose mathematical calculation is more accurate, but a lot of it was about, well, who actually has the authority to determine this. And the Babylonians were saying that they are the more senior scholars, and therefore they should be in charge. And Ben Meir was saying, no, that Israel is the headquarters, and Israel are in charge. Now, so this brought me to a question, and that is, well, who is it? What's the right answer for that? Who is in charge? So let's see how the Rambam presents this. I'm going to read to you from Kiddush HaChodesh, chapter 1, halacha 8, and also from chapter 5, halacha 13. The Rambam says like this. You could only calculate and fix the month in the land of Israel. Shenema, as the pasuk says, Ki mitzion teitzi Torah, Dvar Hashem Yerushalayim, the Torah comes out from Zion, the word of God comes from Jerusalem. If there was a very prominent person who got samicha in Eretz Yisrael, and he went out to Chutz La'aretz, and there was no one left in Eretz Yisrael as great as him, so then under that exceptional circumstance, he is allowed to fix the months in outside of Eretz Yisrael, which is based on a story in the Gemara about Rabbi Kiva who did so. And then the Rambam continues that even so, as soon as he gets word that there is somebody worthy in Eretz Yisrael who is able to do so, so then you're not allowed to do it. In other words, basically this has to happen in Eretz Yisrael. That is halacha aleph of Kiddush Parak aleph of Kiddush HaChodesh halacha ches. And in chapter 5, number 13, the Rambam says like this: this, that nowadays everybody makes the calculations in their own city, right? Because you didn't have the Chabad art, you didn't have calendars being sent out worldwide. But in every Jewish community, they had great sages who knew all this stuff, and they would tell everybody when what the calendar is going to look like. So now that we have in every city, every Chacham says when Rosh Chodesh is, when Yom Tov is. We're not relying on the calculations that we make, because we can't make these calculations outside of Eretz Yisrael. We have to rely exclusively on the calculation made by those Jews living in Eretz Yisrael. This, that we also make the calculations, is just because we don't have telephones to call Eretz Yisrael and see what calculation they made. So we make the calculation to determine what they calculated in Israel. Because we know the algorithms that they are using. So therefore, our calculations is not to determine when should we make Rosh Chodesh. Our calculations that we make are when did the people in Eretz Yisrael create Rosh Chodesh. Of the Kviyas B'Eretz Yisrael, and by the people of Eretz Yisrael establishing it Hu sheyeh Rish Chodesh Yom Tov. That's what makes that day be Rish Chodesh Yom Tov. Not because of the calculations that we make outside of Eretz Yisrael. And that's, as we discussed a number of times, mentioned this yesterday by the class before Mincha, that whereas Shabbos is Kvi B'Kaima, every 7 days is Shabbos, Yom Tov is determined by the Jewish people creating the calendar. So, having said that, now we have to really ask this question, well, if that's the case, why are we following the Babylonian count and not the Israeli count of Ben Meir? So in order to answer this question, at least tentatively, what I'm going to do is I'm going to summarize to you the way the Rambam explains this mitzvah in Sefer HaMitzvahs, and the comments of the Ramban, the challenges of the Ramban on the Rambam, and based on how we understand this, I hope to present at least a possible solution to that problem. By the way, I saw some discussion as to whether the Rambam even knew about this whole controversy. Is it possible that the whole controversy was completely forgotten by the time the Rambam dealt into it? I think it's unlikely, in part because the Rambam lived in Egypt, which is one of the places where, till the days of the Rambam, there was both an Israeli and a Babylonian community, doing their respective minhagim. So I don't know. I'm not an expert on history at all, but it seems unlikely that the Rambam didn't know about it. But anyway, so now the Rambam, it's in the book of mitzvahs and positive mitzvah number 153. So he is really going on. It's very clear that there's a strong polemical. Is that the word? Polemical element to this Rambam, and he's busy defending his view against other views. What's going on? So he says like this. There's a mitzvah the 153rd mitzvah is to create the calendar and to fix the month, etc., etc. And he says, this mitzvah of fixing the month is not dependent on each individual, like Shabbos, right? So every individual Jew has an obligation to keep Shabbos. Rather, this is a mitzvah that is given over to the Beis Din HaGadol, to the High Court of Israel, and also only in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, he says, nowadays we don't have this idea of fixing the calendar based on the sighting of the moon, because in absence of the Beis Din HaGadol, of the High Court of the Jewish people, so then there's no more mitzvah. And this is the mistake that the heretics make, who we refer to as the Karaites, or which was basically an offshoot of the Sadducees, at least in this idea, right? That the Sadducees, they don't believe in this. We'll see soon exactly what the Karaites said, what they said. But the Rambam is saying, this is the mistake they're making. And even from the Perushim, from the Rabbinite Jews, there are very wise men who are stumbling in the dark, who went along with this Karaite mistake. So the Rambam is clearly here up against defending his opinion against the Karaites, and even against some of the Perushim, of the what we would call today Orthodox Jews, right? So there's something, we'll see soon what the Rambam is going on about, right? Then the Rambam continues, and he says again, that we fixed before I quoted to you from the Mishnah Torah, now I'm quoting it to you the same thing from the Sefer HaMitzvahs, where he says that this time in Chutz La'aretz we fix days of calendar of Yom Tov, Rosh Chodesh, etc., is only because in the Beis Din in Eretz Yisrael has already established this day, and we're just determining what they have established and what they have calculated. And I'll add to you, he says, if it were possible, for example, that the Jewish people would be completely absent from Eretz Yisrael, God forbid that this could ever happen, because He already promised that it would never happen, and that there will never not be any Jews left in Eretz Yisrael, basically, and there wouldn't be a Beis Din. Okay, I'm paraphrasing, right? Says the Rambam, if that were to happen, God forbid, then our cheshbon would be useless. In other words, if there were to be no Jews left in Eretz Yisrael, then there would be no point keeping Rosh Chodesh and Yom Tov anymore. Because the only reason why today is Rosh Chodesh, or in this case why tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh, is because there are Jews in Eretz Yisrael who establish that tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh. If there's no Jews in Eretz Yisrael, tomorrow is not Rosh Chodesh, and if tomorrow is not Rosh Chodesh, the 15th of Nisan is not Pesach, etc., and all the Yom Tovim would fall into complete disuse. Okay, that's the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvahs. Comes again the Ramban, and the Ramban, Nachmanides, has his hasagas, his the things that he argues on the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvahs, and he basically has two major problems with the Rambam's whole approach over here. And he says that, first of all, how could the Rambam say that the mitzvah is only done, but the mitzvah of sanctifying the new month based on witnesses is only done based on by the Bezdin HaGadol? The Sanhedrin was already into disuse about 40 years before the destruction of the temple, and we know that they were still sanctifying the month based on sighting of the new moon even long after that, even long after the destruction. That's question number one. Question number two, he says that if you hold that it's dependent on the Bezdin, well then nowadays indeed everything the Yom Tovim are in disuse, because there is, right? So what's going on over here? The words of the Ramban are, he says, here we go. The Rambam says that even when you're doing it not on sighting of the new moon, but based on the calculation of the month, there has to be a bezdin in Eretz Yisrael, or at least a bezdin with smicha in Chutz La'aretz, because that could be an exception if they have smicha in Eretz Yisrael, which again. So then says the Rambam, nowadays there are no more Jewish holidays anymore, for many years already, because there is no smicha, there's no bezdin, there's no nothing. So what does the Ramban say? The Ramban says, actually, so what's his answer? Before we get back to defending the Rambam against the Ramban and to understand perhaps why we're following the Babylonians and not Ben Meir, what's the Ramban's answer? The Ramban says that what do we mean when we say that Hillel HaNasi fixed the calendar? Hillel HaNasi, he preempted by sanctifying all the month until the Beis HaMikdash is rebuilt. So usually the Bezdin sanctified that month, and then the next month they sanctified that month. Every month they sanctify the month that's about to begin. Hillel HaNasi saw that, this is not going to last forever, and there's going to be a time when we won't have smicha. So Hillel HaNasi, futuristically, if that's the word, already sanctified all the months. So why is tomorrow Rosh Chodesh according to the Ramban? Not because there's any calculation happening in Israel, but because thousands of years ago, Hillel HaNasi said that Rosh Chodesh Tammuz of Tov Shim Pei Gimel should be on this and this day. Now,
that fits with the Rambam, no?
No, it doesn't fit with the Rambam. The Rambam doesn't say that at all. The Rambam says that we're doing it based on the calculation that they're currently doing in Eretz Yisrael.
Okay.
Right? And that's why the Rambam says that according to the Ramban, even if there were no Jews or no Bezdin left in Eretz Yisrael, not even, that's when the Ramban says, why is it Yom Tov for Rosh Chodesh today, even though there's no Bezdin left in Eretz Yisrael? There's no Smuchim left in Eretz Yisrael? Because Hillel HaNasi did it. The Rambam doesn't say that. Okay. So, and then the Ramban continues, and this is the mistake of the Karaites. Not like the Rambam said that was the mistake of the Karaites, this is the mistake of the Karaites. So what's going on over here? What's the mistake of the Karaites? So, basically, it goes like this. The Karaites, and this is, amongst other places, this is brought by the Abarmanel in his commentary to Parshas Bo. They said, what's this business of a fixed calendar? We have to have the calendar based on the sighting of the new moon. Right? So the Karaites, and by the way, till today, you could find communities in Israel who have witnesses sighting the new moon, they're still into that. They are saying that that this is the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to sanctify the months based on the sighting of the new moon. That's what the Karaites said. What was the problem with the Karaites? So according to the Ramban, the problem with the Karaites is that Hillel already sanctified it. They don't need to do it anymore. Hillel already did it. According to the Rambam, the problem with the Karaites is no. That they are missing this halacha l'Moshe Sinai, that the mitzvah to sanctify the new moon, both based on sighting, on the month based on sighting, was only then when there was a Sanhedrin, and the same halacha l'Moshe Sinai dictates that nowadays the way they're supposed to sanctify the month is based on the calculations, on the mathematical, on the algorithms. That's the problem of the Karaites. What does the Rambam mean that there's also the Prushim who are going and stumbling in the dark based on the mistake of the Karaites? So he's referring to Rav Hai Goyen, Rav Sadi Goyen, and basically Rav Sadi Goyen has, in his defense against the Karaites, he basically came up with this tremendously novel idea that actually there was never really a mitzvah to sanctify the moon, the calendar based on sighting. It was always supposed to be done from the giving of the Torah. It was always supposed to be done based on the calculation. But what happened was that the Karaites, the heretics, or whoever, the Karaites, the Sadducees, he quotes the Sadducees. The Sadducees, they challenged and undermined the validity of this calculation that we're using. They said that it's not accurate. And so Chazal changed it. And for those number of centuries, Chazal said that we're going to switch to sanctifying the moon based on the sighting of the moon in order to demonstrate the validity of the calculation that we have been using since the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. And by the way, I don't remember exactly how it works, but based on this, Psadi Goyen comes up with a whole different way of understanding 2 days Yom Tov. He holds that 2 days Yom Tov was originally part of the plan. Because, right?
Oh, wow.
And this is a tremendously novel rasag to the extent that the Rambam quotes this rasag in his commentary to the Mishnah on Rosh Hashanah, chapter 2, and he says that I don't even believe that the rasag actually meant this. The rasag was just engaged in this polemic battle with the Sadducees, or whoever the continuation of the Sadducees were in the time of rasag, and he just, that was his only way out of it. So that's what he thought. But here in Sefer HaMitzvos, the Rambam is, without mentioning him, invoking, saying that this is the mistake of the Karaites and this is the mistake of Tzaddik Goyen. But if you understand the Rambam's halacha l'Moshe Missinai, that the Rambam is saying there's halacha l'Moshe Missinai, that when there is no Sanhedrin, this is how we're supposed to create the calendar, then everything falls into place. The problem is, and the Ramban says, where did the Rambam pick up such halacha Moshe Missinai? There's no such Gemara. So then there's other ways to explain where the Rambam got halacha Moshe Missinai from, which are beyond the scope. Okay, so that's a summary of the Rambam's whole thing. Now, how are we going to answer the Rambam's question, the Ramban's question on the Rambam? So the Ramban said, because Hillel HaNasi, he sanctified all the months. But the Rambam doesn't hold that. So what does the Rambam hold? So, to me, the best explanation of the Rambam that I have read comes from Rabbi Rabinovich in his commentary Yad Pshuta on the Rambam. Rabbi Nachum Rabinovich. Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful commentary on the Rambam. Unfortunately, he did not manage to complete it. So he's only written it on, I think, maybe 7, 8, 9 of the 14 books.
It's a brilliant Talmud Chacham.
Brilliant, yeah, absolutely. And the way he explains it, and in interest of time, I'm going to try and say this quickly. He says like this, that there are certain mitzvahs that are, there's three, Bansi, there are certain types of, let's divide it into 3 types of mitzvahs. Say it on. That's how it's supposed to be. Kids should be around people learning Torah, and once in a while they have to be reminded. It's okay. Let's say there's basically 3 types of mitzvahs. There's the mitzvahs that are on the individual, which are, for example, let's start with 2 types of mitzvahs. One of the mitzvahs on the individual, like the Rambam gave the example of Shabbos, and every individual has to keep Shabbos. Then there are mitzvahs that are on the Jewish people as a collective. Now, who does those mitzvahs? Those mitzvahs are done by representatives of the Jewish people, which we call Bezdin. So, for example, if there is an orphan, if there's a baby boy, who has the mitzvah to do the circumcision? The father. What if there's an orphan? There is no father. So then who has the obligation to circumcise him? Bezdin. Now, we don't mean that the Sanhedrin or the CRC have to come and perform the Bris Milah. We mean that the Jewish community do this on behalf of the whoever does it, they are the representatives of the Jewish community as a whole doing it. For example, one of the mitzvahs is the mitzvah to establish a court system. Now, who does that mitzvah? It can't be the Bezdin, because the mitzvah is to establish the Bezdin. So, right, but every community has the people who are going to become the leaders of that community, and whoever does that mitzvah, they are doing it not as individuals, they are doing it as representatives of the Jewish people. Says Rabbi Rabinovich, and again he of course tries to anchor this in the various words of the Rambam, that there's 2 different things going on over here. When we say that the calendar is fixed based on the calendar is fixed based on the sighting of the new moon, that is something that can only be done by the Sanhedrin. It has to be done by the court, by the rabbis who have smicha in Eretz Yisrael. The court was already nullified 40 years before the Churban Abayis. Says Rabbi Rabinovich, no, the Rambam doesn't agree with that. The Rambam will say that they only ceased capital punishment then, but the body of a Bezdin with smicha that had the authority to accept testimony and establish the new moon based on that, the new month based on that still existed for many years after the Churban. That's one type. Then there's the halacha l'Moshe Missinai, that in absence of the requisite Sanhedrin smicha, we should switch to doing a calendar based on the calculation versus a calendar based on sighting of the new moon. There we don't mean that it has to be done by the Bezdin. We mean it has to be done by the Jewish people collectively. So it's like by the same people who will do the bris for the orphan. It's by the representatives of the Jewish people, but with one caveat, that only those in Eretz Yisrael. Whereas the bris for the orphan would be even, Rahman al if it has to be even in Chicago. This is by the Jewish people in Israel. So in that context, when we say Bezdin, we don't mean the Bezdin, the rabbis who have smicha and who are the official court Sanhedrin of the Jewish people. We mean that whoever does this in Eretz Yisrael are ipso facto the Bezdin doing so as representatives of the Jewish people. That is the way Rabbi Rabinovich explains this concept. Now, I don't remember if Rabbi Rabinovich himself says this, or if I'm saying this, or this is I saw somewhere somebody else saying this, but perhaps based on this we could understand why it's okay, so to speak, that we accepted, that Klal Yisrael as a whole accepted the Babylonian calculation, and not because in the moment, in the whole controversy that was going on over there, and all these letters up and back between Bavel and Eretz Yisrael and the Talmidim of Ben Meir, etc., it was all about who has the authority, right? The way we're understanding the Rambam, we're not saying that the Chacham who lives in Eretz Yisrael has more authority than the Chacham who lives in Bavel. Who has more authority? It's like any other matter in halacha. Who has more authority is the Bezdin, is the one who's a greater chacham, or the one whose rulings are accepted by Klal Yisrael, or however we determine halacha in any other area of Torah. Now that authority, that the Babylonian scholars prevailed, and that their halacha became established, so the people in Eretz Yisrael who are making that calculation are ipso facto doing so on behalf of the whole Jewish people. If there's somebody in Eretz Yisrael doing, in other words, you have to. Let's go back a second. The question is based on the premise that whichever chacham, whichever rabbi in Eretz Yisrael determines, just by virtue of him being in Eretz Yisrael, that gives him authority. What I'm saying now is no. What I'm saying now is no. What gives it? Who has the authority? Just like any other area of Torah. In that, there's no difference between Kiddush or Chedesh and any other area, that the person who has the authority is the person, again, who's the smartest, who's the most knowledgeable, who Klal Yisrael accepts, who there's a majority. Again, exactly the whole system of how halacha works. We're not getting into that. But there's no different. This area is no different. You don't get to decide it based on the location where you live. And in this case, it happens to be that Klal Yisrael accepted the Babylonian way of doing it, that we determined this 642 halakim earlier than the opinion of Ben Meir. Now, 1 second, so how does that create the reality of when Pesach is? Because there is somebody in Eretz Yisrael who made this calculation, and that somebody in Eretz Yisrael who made this calculation, ipso facto, is doing so on behalf of the Jewish people. And the person in Eretz Yisrael, be it Ben Meir or be it anyone else, who made the other calculation, well, that was the wrong calculation, which is not halachically accepted, so it's irrelevant what he does. He wasn't doing it, ipso facto, he wasn't doing it on behalf of the Jewish people.
So not everyone in Eretz Yisrael followed Rabbi Meir? Ben Meir?
No, there was always somebody in Eretz Yisrael, because Reb Sadi Goyen had influence, and there were always some people in Eretz Yisrael who were doing the other way, yeah. And even if there weren't, and even if there weren't, then it's irrelevant, even if there weren't, but now there are. Meaning, what was the correct thing to do in 922 and 923 and 927? Okay, we could leave that aside. But what's the right thing to do in 2025? What they're doing, right? Yeah.
Right.
So anyway, that's the summary of the sugya. I found this to be a fascinating topic, and I hope you did too.